Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into something pretty significant, this growing tension, very public tension, between the White House and the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, the sources you sent over paint a really interesting picture. The backdrop is, well, a bit of a mixed market, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. You see the Dow taking a hit, and it looks like United Health's results are a big piece of that puzzle.
Right. And then the NASDAQ is kind of hanging on just slightly up, even though NVIDIA's had a bit of a wobble.
All while these, trade talks are still simmering in the background. Japan's mentioned. There's talk of China maybe wanting another meeting. It's a complex scene.
It really is. But what jumps out, really jumps out from these sources, is this friction between President Trump and Jerome Powell at the Fed. It feels like it's gone up a notch.
Oh, absolutely. Trump saying Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. It's pretty blunt language.
It is. He's clearly signaling major dissatisfaction. He feels Powell's been, I think his phrase was, always too late and wrong on interest rates.
And he's even pointing fingers across the pond, right? Mentioning the European Central Bank cutting rates as sort of exhibit A for what he thinks the Fed should be doing.
Exactly. He sees that ECB move and says, see, that's what we need here.
Okay, so let's break down Trump's side a bit more. What's the core argument he's making for these lower rates?
Well, it seems to boil down to a couple of things. First, he fundamentally believes lower interest rates are the fuel needed to really boost economic growth, get things moving faster.
So any past rate hikes, or even just holding steady now, he sees that as hitting the brakes unnecessarily.
Pretty much. He views the Fed's current stance, maybe their caution about cutting more, as actively holding back the economy. And second, yeah, he feels the U.S. is just out of sync. He looks at the ECB cutting and thinks the Fed should be doing the same, maybe even more aggressively. Lower rates mean cheaper borrowing, more spending. That's the idea.
Got it. Now let's pivot to Powell, because his recent comments, they offer a real contrast. He's talking about a strong likelihood of economic fallout from higher tariffs.
Yes, and maybe even more significantly, he hinted the Fed might have to prioritize tackling inflation, even if that means the job market doesn't stay quite as hot.
That sounds like a very different priority list compared to the president's focus purely on growth. A potential clash there.
A definite difference in emphasis, yes. Powell seems really focused on the potential ripple effects of the administration's trade policies, specifically the risk of inflation.
He used some strong words about the tariffs too, didn't he?
He did. Describe them as sweeping, significantly larger than anticipated, and unlike anything seen in modern history, he's basically warning that these tariffs could push prices up for everyone.
Which might mean the Fed has to keep rates higher, or even raise them, the opposite of what Trump wants.
Exactly. That's the potential conflict. He explicitly said these policies are likely to move us further away from our goals. That's a direct link he's drawing. He even said it puts the Fed in uncharted waters.
Uncharted waters. Wow. And the Fed has that dual mandate, right? Keep employment high, but also keep prices stable.
Correct. Maximum employment and stable prices. Powell seems worried the tariffs could jeopardize the stable prices part, forcing difficult choices.
Okay, so this isn't just theoretical economics chatter. The sources are highlighting real concern that this very public spat could unnerve investors. Why is the Fed's independence such a big deal for the markets?
Well, it's seen as like a bedrock principle. The idea that the Fed makes decisions based purely on economic data, not because of political pressure from, whoever is in the White House or Congress. That's fundamental.
So it's about predictability.
Stability.
Yes, largely. Investors value that independence because it suggests monetary policy will be steady, predictable, and focused on long-term economic health, not short-term political wins. When that independence gets questioned so openly, like with these direct criticisms,
it introduces uncertainty. Exactly. Big uncertainty. Investors start worrying, okay, are interest rate decisions going to be based on sound economics, or are they going to be driven by politics? That potential for politically motivated policy swings, that increases risk. It makes markets nervous. One source called it a foundational appeal of U.S. markets.
A foundational appeal, that's significant. A politicized Fed could lead to volatility.
That's the core concern, yes. Less confidence, more perceived risk.
So for everyone listening, this matters because these tensions just add another layer of what if to an already pretty complex economic picture with trade stuff and global politics swirling around.
Right. Understanding this particular conflict, the arguments on both sides, it helps make sense of potential market movements.
And Senator Elizabeth Warren, she really amplified the stakes here, didn't she?
She certainly did. Her warning that markets could actually crash if a president could just fire the Fed chair at will. That's about as stark as it gets.
What was the reasoning behind that?
It goes right back to that independence point. Her argument is that if the person controlling monetary policy answers directly to the president, you lose that crucial buffer. She used the analogy of a two-bit dictatorship, implying that kind of control undermines the stable, rules-based system that markets rely on.
A two-bit dictatorship.
Yeah.
Strong words. But it's fair to say we also have sources offering a bit of counterbalance.
Yeah, we do. There's a senior White House official quoted saying, essentially, don't read too much into the president's words here, that they shouldn't be seen as an actual threat to fire Powell.
And that there are no current plans to try and remove him early. Plus, Powell himself has basically said the president can't fire him over policy disagreements.
That's right. So you have the heated rhetoric on one side, and then these statements trying to maybe reassure people that the institutional checks are still there.
But does the rhetoric itself cause damage, even if Powell isn't actually fired? Does it erode that perception of independence?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Even if the immediate threat isn't real, the constant public criticism, the questioning of the Fed's motives and competence, that can still chip away at confidence over time. The perception matters a great deal in market.
And Powell, he isn't exactly backing down on his view of the tariffs either. Sticking to his guns that these sweeping tariffs could push the Fed further away from our goals.
No, he's being quite consistent and direct. He's clearly flagging the administration's trade policy as a major challenge for the Fed's job.
But challenged because of that inflation risk again.
Primarily, yes. Tariffs mean higher costs for imported goods, and those costs often get passed along, potentially fueling inflation and making it harder to justify rate cuts.
And yet, President Trump keeps defending the tariffs and hammering Powell as being always too late and wrong. It's just a fundamental disagreement.
It really is. You have two incredibly powerful figures with completely opposing views on how to best manage the U.S. economy right now. One pushing for lower rates and tariffs for growth, the other warning about the risks, especially inflation, and emphasizing the need for careful, independent central banking.
So it leaves us, and our listeners, with a pretty big question to chew on. When you're trying to achieve economic stability and growth, what is the right balance between, let's say, democratic accountability or political direction and the operational independence of an institution like the Fed?
It's a critical question. How much influence is too much? When does independence become detachment?
Yeah. And thinking about all these different views, the warnings from someone like Senator Warren, the reassurances from the White House, Powell's own stance, how does the perception of the Fed's independence, or lack thereof, affect how you see the economy, or maybe even your own financial plans?
It's definitely something worth mulling over. How much does that institutional integrity matter in the grand scheme of things?
A lot to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.